It was a small, forgotten town tucked deep in the woods, where the trees seemed to whisper secrets to the wind, the kind of place where no one stayed for long, and the few that did seemed to carry with them an unsettling stillness. The town of Hollowbrook held a dark history, one that had been buried in time and shadows. Its people didn't speak of the past because the past was filled with blood. A legend lingered about a woman named Ruth. No one knew when she lived, but they all knew how she died, burned at the stake, accused of witchcraft. The townspeople had feared her because she was different, because her presence made the air cold and the nights darker. She hadn't begged for mercy. Instead, as the flames consumed her, she had cursed them all with her final breath. "They'll all come to me, and I'll be waiting." Years passed, and though the town tried to forget her, something in the air remained, a tension, a heaviness, that settled over Hollowbrook like a thick fog. One night, a group of teenagers, Maya, Jack, Ethan, and Olivia, dared each other to visit the ruins of Ruth's old house, now nothing more than a crumbling foundation in the forest. They were young, invincible, and eager for a thrill. The house, it was said, was cursed, but that only made them want to go more. With flashlights and nervous laughter, they ventured into the woods, the thick canopy of trees blocking out the moonlight. The air grew colder as they approached the site. The foundation of Ruth's house lay ahead, overgrown with weeds and vines, but there was something odd about it, something that felt alive. "It's just a ruin," Jack said, stepping forward, "nothing scary about it." But the others felt it, an unease that clung to their skin, a whisper in the air that none of them could understand. Still, they pressed on. Ethan, always the bold one, kicked at a loose stone and chuckled. "So much for a curse," he muttered. As the words left his mouth, a gust of icy wind blew through the clearing, snuffing out their flashlights. Panic surged, but they stood frozen in place. In the pitch-black darkness, they heard it, soft, almost imperceptible at first, like the rustle of leaves. Then it grew louder, a scraping sound, like nails on stone. "I think we should go," Maya whispered, her voice trembling. But it was too late. A low, guttural laugh echoed through the trees, sending shivers down their spines. Out of the shadows, a figure emerged, Ruth. Her charred, blackened skin clung to her bones, her eyes glowing with a cold, hateful light, her mouth twisted into a grotesque grin. "You came to me," she whispered, her voice like the hiss of burning embers, "just like they all do." Before they could scream, the ground beneath them opened up, pulling them down into the earth. They clawed at the dirt, but it was no use. The soil swallowed them, suffocating them in cold, wet darkness. They could feel something slithering around their ankles, pulling them deeper into the abyss. In the suffocating blackness, Maya could hear Jack choking on dirt, Olivia's muffled sobs, and Ethan's frantic scratching at the ground. But what scared her the most was the voice in her ear, soft and calm. "You belong to me now, you all do." And then, silence. The townspeople searched for the teenagers the next day but found nothing. No trace of them, no footprints, not even a piece of clothing. It was as if they had never existed. Over time, people forgot their names, forgot the story, and continued living in Hollowbrook, unaware of the trap that lay in the woods. But the curse remained. Ruth remained. Years later, another group would come, and another. The ground would open, the earth would swallow, and Ruth would claim them, one by one. No matter how many vanished, the town would never stop sending more. Because the true horror of Hollowbrook wasn't the ghost of Ruth, it was the town itself. The townspeople had made a pact long ago. After Ruth's death, they had condemned her to die, and in return, she had promised them safety from her wrath, so long as they fed her souls. And so they did. And they always would. Because in Hollowbrook, the past never dies, it just keeps feeding. The years passed, and Hollowbrook continued to feed the darkness. No one ever spoke of the pact aloud, but everyone knew what it meant. People would come and go, but the town itself remained cursed, haunted by its own sins. Ruth was no longer the vengeful ghost, she was the town's lifeblood, its sinister guardian. The townspeople lived under her shadow, complicit in her endless hunger, their lives exchanged for the blood of the innocent. But then came a year unlike any other, a year when the town's victims stopped arriving. Fewer travelers wandered into Hollowbrook, and those who did were careful, never venturing near the woods or staying long enough to vanish. The town began to feel the weight of Ruth's hunger pressing down. Strange things started happening, children falling ill, crops withering overnight, the sky growing darker even in the middle of the day. They knew Ruth was angry, knew her hunger was growing uncontrollable. One night, the town's mayor, a man named Henry Galloway, called an emergency meeting. Every adult gathered in the old town hall, their faces pale and lined with fear. "We have to do something," Henry said, pacing in front of them. "She's getting restless. We need to offer her something, or she'll come for all of us." "But who?" asked Martha, the baker's wife. "There are no outsiders left. No one travels through here anymore." A heavy silence fell over the room. They all knew what had to be done, but no one wanted to say it. Henry stopped pacing and looked at the crowd. "It doesn't have to be outsiders." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. The unthinkable had been spoken, but deep down, they all knew it would come to this. The curse had run its course. There was no one left to feed Ruth but their own. "We'll draw lots," Henry continued, his voice grim. "A fair chance for everyone. One name will be chosen, and that person will go to the woods." The townspeople stared at him in horror, but no one objected. They couldn't. The weight of the pact was too heavy, the fear of Ruth too deep. And so, they drew the lots. One by one, they stepped forward, pulling slips of paper from a small wooden box. Tension filled the air, each person's heart racing as they unfolded their fate. The room grew colder as the pile of papers dwindled. Then came the name. Martha Lewin. Martha's breath caught in her throat. Her hands shook, the paper slipping from her fingers. Her husband, Tom, tried to speak, but no words came out. The room was silent, the eyes of the townspeople avoiding hers. Martha was led to the edge of the forest that night. Her steps were slow, each one dragging as if her feet were made of lead. She didn't fight. She knew there was no use. She could hear the whispers of the town behind her, feel their cold stares as they pushed her toward the cursed woods. Her heart pounded as the trees loomed before her, dark and oppressive. "Go," Henry said softly, but with a tone of finality. "She'll take care of the rest." With trembling hands, Martha stepped into the woods. The darkness swallowed her, the air growing colder with every step. She could feel something watching her, something ancient, something angry. The trees seemed to close in around her, the ground softening beneath her feet as if it were hungry, pulling her down. And then she saw her. Ruth stood in the center of the clearing, her charred, skeletal form illuminated by an unnatural glow. Her eyes burned with cold fury, her lips twisted into that same horrific grin. "You took too long," Ruth whispered, her voice like a sharp, cold wind cutting through the air. "Now, you will all pay." Martha opened her mouth to scream, but it was too late. The ground beneath her opened up, and roots shot up from the earth, wrapping around her legs, her arms, her neck. She was pulled down, the soil filling her mouth, her lungs, suffocating her as the earth consumed her body. Back in the town, the wind began to howl, the sky blackened, and the earth beneath their feet trembled. One by one, the lights in the town went out, plunging the streets into pitch-black darkness. A voice, Ruth's voice, echoed through the town, carried by the wind. "You broke the pact. Now, I will take you all." The ground began to crack, splitting open like the jaws of a beast, swallowing homes, streets, and people. Screams filled the air as the townsfolk tried to run, but there was no escape. The earth beneath them gave way, dragging them down into the black abyss. Ruth wasn't satisfied with one sacrifice. She wanted them all. And she took them. By morning, Hollow Brook was nothing more than a memory. The town was gone. Its buildings crumbled. Its people vanished without a trace. The forest grew over the ruins, hiding any evidence that the town had ever existed. Only the trees remained, whispering secrets to the wind, telling the story of a town that had betrayed its own, a town that had been consumed by the darkness it had created. But Ruth still waited. She always waited. For the next town, for the next name. Years passed, and Hollow Brook became a distant, forgotten myth, its existence erased from maps and memories. Nature reclaimed the land, but Ruth remained, buried beneath the roots of the forest, waiting. She had devoured every soul in the town, but her hunger was insatiable. The curse wasn't bound to a place, it was bound to her, and Ruth's reach extended far beyond the boundaries of the old town. As the world moved on, a small group of developers discovered the land. To them, it was nothing more than an abandoned plot, ideal for a new housing development. They had no idea of the darkness that lurked beneath the soil, no understanding of the ancient hunger they were about to awaken. The construction began. Machines tore into the earth, uprooting trees, leveling the ground, and laying foundations for a new suburban neighborhood. It was to be called Riverside Grove, a picturesque community for families looking to escape the bustle of city life. The developers advertised it as peaceful, serene, a place to raise children away from the noise of the world. But the ground beneath them was anything but peaceful. Strange occurrences began almost immediately. Workers reported hearing voices in the wind, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere. Tools would go missing, only to be found buried in the earth, twisted and rusted beyond recognition. One of the workers, a man named Carlos, swore he saw a woman standing at the edge of the clearing, watching them with cold, lifeless eyes. No one believed him until he disappeared the next day. His co-workers searched the site, but there was no trace of him. It was as if the earth had swallowed him whole. Despite the mounting unease, the developers pushed forward. Money was on the line, and delays were costly. They assured the workers that everything was fine, that the strange happenings were just nerves and overactive imaginations. But as the first homes were completed, the darkness that had once consumed Hollow Brook began to seep into the lives of the new residents. The families who moved into Riverside Grove were excited. The homes were beautiful, the streets clean and quiet. It seemed like paradise. But soon, the whispers began. At first, it was just at night, a low murmur that drifted through the windows. Impossible to pinpoint. The children complained of nightmares, dark, vivid dreams filled with the image of a burned woman with hollow eyes. Pets went missing, and strange symbols appeared on the walls of the homes, scrawled in a dark, oily substance that no one could identify. One night, a young couple, Sarah and Greg, awoke to the sound of footsteps in their home. Greg grabbed a baseball bat and crept downstairs, but found nothing. As he turned to go back upstairs, the lights flickered, and for a brief moment, he saw her, Ruth, standing at the foot of the stairs, her eyes locked onto his, her body still and unnatural. "Get out," she whispered, her voice cold and guttural. Greg stumbled back, his heart racing, but when the light steadied, she was gone. He tried to tell Sarah, but she brushed it off as a bad dream. That night, their daughter, Lily, vanished from her bed. The entire community was thrown into chaos. Search parties combed the area, but Lily was nowhere to be found. As more children began disappearing, the truth started to sink in. This place was cursed. They had built their homes on cursed land. One by one, the families tried to leave, but it was too late. The roads leading out of Riverside Grove twisted and turned, looping back on themselves. No matter how far they drove, they always ended up back at the entrance to the development. Panic spread like wildfire. The town was a trap, and Ruth was waiting. That night, the ground trembled, and the earth began to split open. The streets cracked, homes crumbled, and roots burst from the soil, wrapping around the houses and pulling them into the ground. The whispers grew louder, filling the air with screams and laughter, as the earth consumed everything. In the center of it all stood Ruth, her form twisted and charred, her eyes glowing with hunger. She watched as the family screamed for help, their hands reaching out from the sinking ground, but there was no mercy in her gaze. "You're mine now," she whispered. The darkness swallowed them all. Every house, every person, every scream was buried beneath the earth, just as it had been in Hollow Brook. By morning, there was nothing left of Riverside Grove. The land was barren, the homes reduced to rubble, as if they had never been. The forest grew back, thick and overgrown, hiding the scars of what had happened. And Ruth still waited. The curse wasn't tied to a place anymore. It moved with her, carried on the wind, slipping through cracks in the earth, waiting for the next group of people to wander too close, to build on land that was never theirs. And they always would. Because no matter where she was, Ruth's hunger would never end. And neither would her revenge. No one could escape. Not forever. Not ever.